Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Scott Arizala Show, presented by CampHacker.tv. My name is Travis Allison. Hey, Scott, how's it going today?
Great, Travis. How you doing?
I am fantastic. A little coldy, as people can no doubt tell by my voice, but happy to be doing the show with you today.
Yeah, I'm super excited about today's topic. I wanted to bring up something that's actually a little bit harder to talk about sometimes at camp and in our programs, which is diversity and difference. I think it's something that's so important for us to be talking about because so many of us live and work and exist in a space where there are so many differences in the people around us. Whether those are really obvious differences like skin color or not so obvious differences like ability or socioeconomic background or whatever. But I think it's worthwhile for us to talk about as a topic and as something that we need to frankly do better at as far as teaching our young people what these things kind of really mean. A big thing that I wanted to sort of start with is talking about, well, what actually is diversity? And I've got to start by saying that I really actually can't stand most of the diversity training that exists out there right now, or at least the ones I've been exposed to. I can't say I've been exposed to a tremendous amount, and I'm sure there are people out there that do amazing diversity trainings. But I will tell you, the ones that I've been a part of, a lot of times focus on the concept of tolerance. And to me, it's a cop-out when it comes to talking about diversity, because what does the word even really mean? It basically means like, well, I don't really, we have these differences and I don't really like them, but I'm just going to deal with them. Like, I'm just going to tolerate that you're around or whatever. And that's not what I want to get at when I'm working with young people or when I'm working with kids about what tolerance or what diversity really is. It's not about tolerance. It should be about sort of celebration. It should be about seeking out what's different, because those differences are going to be what make us strong. So we had an experience in my camp that I just wanted to share with you really quick. We have a group that we work with called our TLPs, or they're our Team Leadership Program. A lot of camps would call them their LITs or their CATs or their junior leaders, so forth. It's our 15 and 16-year-olds, kind of that transition period between kind of being a true camper and being a staff member. At any rate, as many of you know, I work with lots of different kinds of populations, and our Team Leadership Program is a mixture of all those populations. We typically do 1 week for kids with autism, for example, or 1 week for kids with sickle cell, and so on and so forth. Well, with our Team Leadership Program, it's a 2, sometimes 3 week program, and any kid that goes to Dragonfly can be involved in that program. So we often get these really interesting mixes of kids. And one of the things that we noticed straight away is that because of the diversity, our kids were really uncomfortable. And that to me is a really great sort of basic definition of what diversity really is. It's about being uncomfortable and kind of being okay with the being uncomfortable. And instead of us trying to teach them to tolerate that diversity, right? Kind of be polite, don't say anything, smile at each other, invite each other into games, whatever, which is, I think a skill in and of itself, and what I think a lot of people in our society could benefit from, just those skills. We wanted to take it to the next level and say, no, for our kids, we want to teach them how to celebrate diversity. And so how are we really going to do that? And one of the things that we did is within the first, it was the first 24 hours. So we gave them about 24 hours to kind of get to know each other a little bit. And then we had a big diversity conversation. And one of the things that we asked everybody to do is every group that was represented, whether that was, and in this particular session, we had kids with autism, kids with something called 22q, kids with different kinds of bleeding disorders like hemophilia and sickle cell, or blood disorders, I should say, and kids with persistent asthma. And what we did is we had all the groups come together, and each group went up to the front of this group of other 15 and 16-year-olds and basically talked about what it was like to have autism or sickle cell or whatever. And it was really interesting because, as you can imagine, 15 and 16-year-olds, while maybe not the most politically correct and articulate when they are asking each other questions or talking about themselves, certainly are very curious and inquisitive and frankly ask the questions that I think sometimes we all want to ask, but we just struggle with the right words. And since they're kind of naive about some of that and didn't have some of that baggage going into the conversation, they could ask each other things that frankly was pretty amazing. And it started us on this journey of how do we really actively celebrate, diversity and pull it in. And with that experience, I mean, it taught us that there are several sort of skills and behaviors, things that you're actually going to do to really create not only a diverse, or not create a diverse community, I should say, embrace the diverse community that you're actually in.
Right. There are some camps, and certainly it was my experience growing up, that there wasn't a lot of diversity at my own camp growing up. Although I'm starting to realize, I've realized as I got older that there was more diversity than I saw. And certainly the lack of diversity in skin color didn't mean that we were not a diverse population. But those camps that feel that this discussion's not important, not worth setting aside time for, what would you say to them?
A couple things. First, I would say, I would sort of highlight what you just said. A lot of times diversity isn't as obvious as when there are people of different colors or different genders or things or different ways that they identify outwardly. So I think that's the first place we look, and that's what's sort of the obvious place. And you're right, there are lots and lots of camps that don't have that kind of diversity, and so you wouldn't sort of fault them for being like, well, we don't have a lot of diversity, why should we pay attention to something like this? So my first point would be is that there is probably a lot of diversity at your camp, if not with skin color, potentially with background, definitely with family situations, maybe religious or political beliefs. All those kinds of things I think count as diversity, as people coming at this experience from different angles and different viewpoints. So there probably is more diversity at most of those programs than we maybe can see. I think the second thing, and this sort of speaks to, I think, the mission of camp in general, is that part of what we're doing at camp is helping to build strong kids, kids with a lot of character, kids with a lot of a strong moral compass, kids with good values. That is part of the camp experience. That's in camp's DNA. It's one of the reasons why we're successful as a industry, because that's what we do. We're not just for fun. We kind of wrap everything in fun, but it's not just for fun. And if we're going to take that seriously, we are turning these very kids out into a world that is absolutely diverse, right? Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to have kids that only experience kids from a certain socioeconomic status and will probably for the rest of their lives. I'm not saying that you're not going to experience kids that come from a racial community that is pretty homogeneous and won't stay in that community. That's all true. And we live in a diverse world, that if we want to send those kids out with the skills to be able to navigate that world, we have to take it seriously, that we have to help build a skill set for them to be able to actually be productive in that world.
Right. Well, what are those skills then, Scott?
I think there's a few. I think that the first is about really clear, direct, open, honest communication. I think it's one of the things that we're not very good at, unless we happen to be online, or sort of unless we have digitized our communication. I think people actually are much more honest and open and direct via Twitter and their Facebook status and the pictures they take on Instagram and the like, more so than in person in real life. And I think that's a huge skill, to be able to say, to be open and honest, to be able to have a question about differences, to be able to not understand something and ask, to be able to kind of check your own assumption and say, well, I thought this about you or your group, and be able to say that out loud. That's hard. But clear communication is about creating that kind of uncomfortable space that we're talking about. I think another huge skill set that we all have to have is a willingness to compromise. At the end of the day, right, a lot of what celebrating diversity really is about accepting something new, accepting something different, accepting something as a change or as a difference. That's, by definition, really hard. So we have to work on being able to be really good at compromise and being able to be really good at saying, okay, I want this, you want that. Where can we meet in between? I think another huge skill is flexibility. We have to be willing to say, if it's not going to happen one way, we've got to be able to figure out a different way for us to be able to get there. And we have to be flexible, sort of with each other, with one another, and flexible about what we thought was going to happen. Whether it's this program, it's this conversation, it's my cabin group, whatever it is. We have to be at the end of the day. We have to be good cab drivers. If you've ever been to a big city and you've got to, like, let's say you're in New York. You're in downtown New York. You got to get out to JFK to catch your flight. You get into a cab. Do you want that? There is one best way to get from 38th Street to JFK. There's one best way. Everybody that you know from New York will argue about what that best way is, but there is one best way. Do you want that cab driver that you get into that cab, do you want them to only know the one best way? Well, of course not. Because if they only know that one best way, you're never going to make your flight, right? What kind of cab driver do you want? Of course you want the one that's going to take the most direct, the best way, but you want a cab driver that knows 50 different ways to get there, right? Because inevitably there's going to be traffic, there's going to be roadblocks, there's going to be accidents, whatever. So you want to have the flexibility to go any which way to get to the end result. That's what that's the skill we need to enhance in our young people and in ourselves.
I think, Scott, they also have to be patient about things as well.
Yeah, no doubt, right? Because, patience is kind of built into everything that I was just talking about, clear communication and compromise and flexibility, right? Because you've got to be willing to sort of take that deep breath and be calm about what it is that you're doing and not sort of rush through to the end, right? Or sort of get through the awkwardness. If we're talking about celebrating diversity, we're talking about being uncomfortable. We're talking about being, feeling awkward. Not very many people like to stay in that space, but that's the space where we do the most growing. That's the space where we do the most pushing, and that's what's incredibly important about making sure that this, we have sort of the skill set. So being really patient. And then, I keep saying it, and I'm going to come back to it finally as an actual skill, which is just being uncomfortable. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And what does that feel like? And what does that look like? And what does that sound like? And how can we grow from that experience? Those are the sort of crucial skills in really celebrating diversity the way we're talking about it.
Yeah. So, Scott, what should a camp director do to move their camp towards an openness and diversity?
I think, first of all, you got to have this conversation. You've got to have it with your sort of yourself, your other admin, your other sort of year-round leaders. You got to have it with your staff. You've got to be willing to put it out there. You've got to ask your staff questions like, do you want to live and experience a diverse community and in a diverse space? We've got to be willing to have the conversation. I think too often we sort of stop and don't pursue the conversation, and that's just not healthy. That's not getting us to that space. I think also the things that we have to do is we have to create the space for difference. At summer camp, it's one of the only places in the world that I can imagine or that I can think of that we are fully responsible and actively create the culture that exists around us. From the values to the routines to how we run meals. I mean, everything that we do at camp is about creating a particular kind of culture. With that, we have to create the sort of emotional and intellectual and sometimes even physical space for there to be something different, for some different expression to be okay, some different behavior to be okay. A lot of camps are really good at this. A lot of camps really sort of praise uniqueness, praise when kids are different, praise when kids are really creative. And we just have to stay on top of it because it's easy to slip into, when we're not doing that and when we're pigeonholing and when we're sort of assuming. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old little girl, and guess what she's into, right? Princesses and unicorns and rainbows and all that. But I will tell you that no matter how much my wife and I kind of cringe at that, that is actually kind of sort of assumed onto her everywhere we go. Everything from, people, with the best intentions, but they say stuff to her like, oh, what a sweetheart, what a princess. Oh, you look so good. I mean, like, so many comments to her are about how she looks, her clothes, the girly stuff that she'd be into. She is into that stuff, and it's sort of assumed on her. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we've got to create the space for her to make a different choice as well. And I think lastly, just sort of like I said with one of the skills, I think the last thing we have to do is just like be awkward. Just be okay with that. Be okay with it being uncomfortable. Notice when you're uncomfortable and react to that as if being able to say to yourself, here's where I'm growing. Here's where I'm actually challenging and pushing myself.
Some great stuff again, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Travis. I really appreciate it. For those of you watching, please check us out and leave a comment on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook or any other social networks that you find out there. We'd love to hear from you folks and hear about any other topics that you'd like to see us get into. If you want to find out more about what we do, you can check out Travis's website at camphacker.tv, or you can check out my website at thecampcounselor.com. We really appreciate y'all tuning in. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next summer.
Well, my body